Hello there. I'm probably going to repeat myself here, but this is stuff that I tend to think about a lot, and I may have talked about it before. I don't know. Well, partly I have. It's very. It seems very clear that you know something is coming to an end. Things are coming to an end, and the thing that's coming to an end is a kind of post-war liberal project. Yeah, and so it comes out of that time, but it comes right up till this time. However, a change took place at the same time, you know, and I think the change that took place was a new generation basically took over, and that generation is, well, I guess it's the kind of like what people term the boomers and Gen Xers and stuff, yeah. But in any case, new generation took over, and that generation brought with it the delusional politics of the 1960s to add to the mix, I guess. Though, of course, you've still got whatever contradictions were in the original project, yeah. Um, and it's brought that with it, and those people, that ideology, that politics has pretty much seeped into and infiltrated every institution in a place like the UK. It seeped into every institution. And an old establishment is gone, an old elite is gone, and a new elite has taken its place. And while the old elite, you know, we had all sorts of criticisms of it when I was younger, yeah, which is a long time ago now. We had all sorts of criticisms of it, yeah, but it actually basically sought to look after its country, basically sought to preserve its culture, and basically sought to look after its people, yeah. Essentially, yeah. Um, and the new elite doesn't and hasn't and has failed to do so in a very proactive fashion. It has essentially attacked its own culture, its own people, its own country, because that's what its ideals and its philosophy require. Because it's a kind of liberalism which is very, very ambitious, very, very ambitious, and has a supposedly global vision. Yeah, it is all very 1960s. Yeah, in that way, and it's kind of done that, and of course it's inevitably meshed with corporatism and this all the sort of like stuff and all these sort of like organs that it's sort of like spewed out, all the NGOs and all these sorts of things, which expresses at a national level as this sort of like quangocracy and all this sort of stuff. Yeah. But anyway, we've had all of this, but and that's coming to an end. It's disintegrating, and it's disintegrating due to its own results. Yeah, it's not coming up against some sort of a conspiracy, however much it accuses other people of conspiracy. It's not coming up against a conspiracy. However much it says that other people are conspiracy theorists. Yeah, but it's not coming up against a kind of like a conspiracy. It's coming up against the results of its own actions. In other words, it's running up against reality, essentially. The old, the old elite, the old establishment. We had all sorts of criticisms of them when I was younger. Um, we had all sorts of criticisms. A lot of them naive, some of them warranted, but the fact is, the old elite basically looked after the country, looked after the culture, preserved it, yeah. And we, like spoilt brats, thought that somebody would always be there to look after the culture. Or there were the real lunatics who actually thought that they'd be better off doing away with it, yeah, I guess. But anyway, the old elite looked after things. At whatever price, it looked after things. The new elite does not do that. It's it's just part of its vision. It's part of its vision. You know, think global, act local. But actually, it's more like think global, act upon the local. You know, impose your will upon the local. That's basically how that works out. It's the shadow side of all those lovely sayings. Just like the personal is political. Yeah, you know, turn people's turn people's personal lives into a theatre of ideological war. Wouldn't that be a good idea? Yeah. Well, anyway, but what I was really wanting to sort of like ask and think about in this video was, given that this is coming to an end, and it really is, um, how do we preserve the good things that might have been developed throughout the experiment? And I don't just mean in the post-war years. I mean, really, it's going back all the way through. It's the post-enlightenment phase. Yeah, all the stuff, all the good stuff that we have actually got from this. Yeah. How do we conserve those things? Yeah. Because I think that's what some of us should be asking ourselves. Yeah. Um, it would be quite easy for, I think, some people to just kind of say, we're going to go back um, to something that was there before, and it's just going to be, you know, what it was. But that doesn't happen. Yeah. Um, and you know, we quite rightly criticize Islam as a medieval religion, and I think that's perfectly right. But we don't want to go back to our own medieval period, yeah. Um, uh, but the failure we've experienced is so extraordinary, yeah. It's so obvious and so morally reprehensible, so dishonest, yeah. That quite clearly a lot of things deserve to go, yeah. And I mean, I found in my own life myself slowly coming to this kind of conclusion between the mid 90s and about 2015. There was this period of just basically like wrestling with uh, the dominant ideology, basically, and just like thinking, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense either. That's hypocrisy, you know. Um, that just doesn't that can't work. Hold on a second. You just said that, and now you're asserting something entirely opposite because it's convenient to you now. And it was basically coming up against the hypocrisy of what you might call the leftist liberal kind of alliance, which had developed from the 1970s onwards. Um, I think it started with things like seeing the complete hypocrisy of parts of feminism and the way that men were talked about, especially heterosexual men, while at the same time depending on them for so much. Yeah, uh, you know that I found. I just thought this just isn't right. Yeah, hold on a second, this is just not right. Yeah, um, and yeah, what at one time was called gay rights, and has since become just a whole lot of craziness. In fact, the thing with gay rights is that that got to the end of the line, and then um, the same people went home, and the activists, the activists, they've got to find something to do, haven't they? Something to justify their their positions, Anyway, but we should ask ourselves, well, what do we do now? What do we do now if we want to maintain what seemed like the good fruits of liberalism. Yeah, the reasonable tolerance. Yeah, and well, we've got to separate out politics from so much of life for a start. I think. Yeah, yeah, and realize where things really come from, because politics is to a large extent a pretty poisonous business. Yeah, there are things which are necessary and vital. Yeah, but the politics of the 1960s certainly was an absolute shit show. It really was, you know, and what it led to was just dreadful in so many cases. And I don't normally kind of like try to address anybody who consider themselves to be progressive, but kind of like there was a time a long time ago, it seems now, when I would have thought of myself as being progressive because it seemed like a good thing. Well, who doesn't want to progress? Of course, it's a rubbish term because progress just means going in a direction, that's all, you know. But the question is, what do we do? Having seen how foolish this project was, and how foolish and naive we could be as well, to even support it in some way or other, until it finally, like, just you just couldn't bear the the contradictions anymore. Yeah. What do we do? Well, you know what? I would say to progressives, yeah, rather than railing against reality, rather than fighting reality, yeah, maybe it's time to come to terms with reality and see how do we live within it. Yeah, I think that's the thing to do, really, um, because the fact is the world isn't about you, and it's not about your concerns. It's not about your rights. Yeah, yeah. I mean, let's be quite clear. We make up human rights, yeah? I mean, I'm glad that we do, and every society has its version of them in one way or another, yeah? I would guess. But the fact is, we make them up, yeah? So stop behaving like they are a kind of, they descend from the heavens, yeah? And stop thinking that it's about you and your concerns and your particular issues, yeah? Those things aren't important. We have much, much, much bigger things that face us. We really do. Much, much bigger things. Things which are civilizational and cultural. And we have to live within that. That's where we have to find our home. Yeah? So I think it's time. It's probably time to come home, don't you think? Yeah? And grow up. I think that's the thing to do, really, for a lot of people. But how things get preserved at this point, that's a big question, because you have to decide, are they worth preserving? Because there's a lot of stuff isn't. A lot of stuff that people are very, very keen on is not worth preserving. Not at all. Some of it's awful, and we need to sort of like come to terms with those things. Yeah, because the good the good will survive. The good will survive. But there's an awful lot of stuff that doesn't deserve to survive. And that's something to wake up to, really.